Ave Maris Stella, Dei Mater.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today is day 157. We're giving you a general overview of Optatam Totius, which is a document on priestly formation, and we're going to interview Father Mark Doherty of St. Patrick's Seminary for that. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican. So, if you remember, give you a context of the whole year, Vatican II has a number of documents. We're taking them chronologically by promulgation date, which may not be perfect thematically, but that seemed to be the simplest ordering to do. And so, what does Optatam Totius mean? It means desired renewal for the whole, and it would here refer to the whole church, right? And how is it approved? It was approved 2,318-3. So it shows a almost perfect unanimity among the bishops. You have a tenth of 1% or 2/10 of 1% who didn't approve it. So the vast majority of the bishops. So I want to introduce our guest here, Father Mark, Reverend Mark Doherty, STL. He's the president/rector of St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park, which is near San Francisco, since 2021. Born in the U.S., but you grew up in Africa where your dad was working for Catholic Relief Services. You were in the Jesuit.
When I was young. Mm-hmm.
You ordained a priest for San Francisco in 2014, did MA in philosophy from Fordham, licensed in philosophy, STL from Freiburg, and working on your doctorate in dogmatic theology. So welcome to the podcast, Father Mark.
I'm very glad to be here with you and with your audience.
Excellent. So I think I mentioned in the beginning, I was teaching at St. Patrick's this past year. So I know Father Mark from that in case anybody's there's conflicts of interest. Just totally open about all that. So for Optatam Totius, we're going to have 4 parts of our interview here, right? So the first thing is going to be really the history of priestly formation in the 20th century or thereabouts. Some key themes, well, actually going into today, like the last century, some key themes to document a summary of each chapter and outline, and then really the biggest document on priestly formation since then, which was Pastores Dabo Vobis. I will give them shepherds, or I'll give you shepherds, from John Paul II, which is kind of like the follow-up, and the biggest document sits Optatam Totius on priestly formation. So I think we can break priestly formation over the last century into 3 main periods, which varied in length and time from place to place. I would talk about the pre-Vatican II, and then we talk about the spirit of Vatican II, or other problems that were going on that might have skipped a few seminaries, and then I think the current situation, which we're doing much better than that kind of spirit of Vatican II issues that we had in the 70s and things. Could you explain those 3 periods and how that happened, Father Mark?
Sure. So the pre-Vatican II period, to understand that period a bit more fully, you really have to go back to the Council of Trent. So we have to go back about 500 years. At the Council of Trent, the Church determined that going forward, it would be best if the formation of priests were to be systematized and a bit more centralized. Prior to the Council of Trent, with respect to the formation of secular clergy, which is what we most refer to as diocesan clergy, the formation of secular clergy was not systematized, it was not regularized, and it was left to individual bishops and even individual priests forming their young disciples to become priests and what have you. And that obviously was incredibly problematic on a lot of fronts. But coming out of the Council of Trent, and we have figures like St. Charles Borromeo, who's going to be a significant figure in this movement, there's a very concerted effort to systematize and better organize the formation of men for the diocesan or secular clergy. That's the model that's going to persist even up to our day today. It's certainly the model that's going to be in force before Vatican II in the first half of the 20th century. There are other obviously major elements that go into understanding a little bit what formation for the priesthood before Vatican II would have looked like. Of course, the effects of the French Revolution had a significant impact on the life of the Church in the 19th and 20th centuries. The world wars, of course, were going to have an influence, the Industrial Revolution and other elements like that. if we're to speak about what formation for the priesthood before Vatican II looked like in the day-to-day, I think one of the things, among the things we could say is probably there was a very regimented system of formation that was based on a very detailed and regimented daily ordo or horarium. And a lot of formation for the priesthood depended in large measure on these external mechanical structures, if you will, a very rigid schedule, the living out of a lot of pious practices and things like that. The intellectual formation would have been, in general, leaning very strongly in the direction of manualistic neoscholasticism. And one of the things that stands out a lot to me that I think was a source of real concern for the bishops at the council and has become all the more so the case in succeeding decades is the fact that formation for the priesthood before Vatican II in some respects was rather industrial, by which I mean what you would have had is a large number of seminarians going through a seminary with very few formators and priests, very few mentors, very little oversight in many respects. So you could have, for example, 100 seminarians and one priest. Sometimes in religious life, you would have had a situation where you had 50 to 100 novices and one novice master and one socius. So you had a lot of seminarians, a lot of men in formation, and very, very few people engaged in the process of forming them. And what that inevitably led to is a situation where a lot of the men just were not getting the kind of accompaniment and mentoring that they needed in order to properly discern, in order to mature, and in order to get them ready for ordained ministry. There would have also been the presence of a strong cultural inclination towards the priesthood, such that it wouldn't have been unlikely for a lot of young men, boys and young men, to go into seminary formation who had not actually really discerned a vocation sufficiently well, but were rather motivated by societal expectations, family expectations, and things like that. So they would have been going into seminary, going through seminary and getting ordained without really having made an adequately free choice or free determination as to whether this is what the Lord was really calling them to do. And I think those are some of the things that the Council Fathers have in mind that they seek to begin to address in this decree at Vatican II. The questions of human freedom, questions of genuine discernment, and also you have the beginning of a deeper awareness of the importance of the basic human element of formation and maturation that is required in order to engage in spiritual and pastoral formation that will lead to a successful integrated priesthood life down the road.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that I can see some of that when I talk to some of the fathers of my community who are older. Like some of them had kind of like talked about experiences like that they'd see in the seminary and things like that. And then we had kind of after Vatican II, there was a period where we had kind of, sometimes it's called like the spirit in quotation marks of Vatican II, and there were a lot of issues. What kind of happened? What can you describe about like that period?
So it's, well, where to begin?
I'm looking for a quick summary, not a 45-minute explanation.
Well, I think if the remarks I just made could use as a launch point to understand what happened and why it may have happened. Their coming out of the council would have been an appreciation of the fact that the external structures and rigors, the very strict horariums and ordos of seminary life could not be relied upon to could not stand as the real central element or core of the formation of men. that in conjunction with an awareness that in order to really enter into the vocation and be well integrated to live a happy, holy life as a priest, there was due regard for the freedom of the man, etc. On account of those various concerns, what happened coming out of Vatican II in many seminaries, many ecclesial institutions, is that there was a complete disregard for the role of these external structures and the positive place they actually do have. So what you would have had at a place like St. Patrick's, the seminary here in Menlo Park, typical of many, many places, the daily schedule would have been thrown out. Disciplinary obligations would have been marginalized or minimized and disregarded. And there would have been this sense that in order for the men to really mature and make their way on to ordination, they had to be given much more sweeping freedom to basically do whatever they wanted. The whole kind of disciplinary and discipline structure of seminary life disintegrated rather quickly. With regard to intellectual formation, as I had noted, pre-Vatican II, most seminary formation leaned heavily in the direction of neo-scholasticism, which relied a lot on the manual tradition. Well, coming out of Vatican II, then there was, as was the case with the discipline structures, there was this move to just jettison Thomism altogether and throw it out the window. And there was this strong drive to, quote unquote, open up the church and seminaries and men in formation to a whole wide range of currents of thought, etc. And so the intellectual formation really disintegrated in many, many respects and became basically a free-for-all. And that too was... Mm-hmm.
No, definitely. And there were certain other things that got to very scandalous at that time. And I think now, really in the last, depending on the seminary, but, in the last 20, 30 years, we've had a much more balanced kind of thing that I think either before Vatican II or after Vatican II, it seemed to be like going in opposite directions of extremes. Is that an accurate description, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think what you had is exactly that. A pendulum swung completely in the other direction in rather unhinged fashion. And then I think what you have with Pastoris Dabis Vobis, 1992, coming out of the Synod on priestly formation in 1990, there had been this growing realization that the post-conciliar efforts at integrating the teaching of Vatican II had gone awry in many ways, including in the realm of priestly formation, and there was a needed effort to balance things out and to recenter things.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And now, as we've gone through this, I think right now, a lot of what Optatam Totius and then Pastoris Dabis Vobis said are really being implemented pretty well in seminaries. Is there anything you would say that you see in seminaries in general that could better, or in other aspects of priestly formation that could better express what the Fathers of Vatican II wanted when they wrote Optatam Totius?
So in other words, the question is what are the growing edges? Where are the areas that we could do better, so to speak?
Yeah. Like what things do you think we could do better? For example, one thing I definitely think could do better is paragraph 2 of Optatam Totius talks about praying for vocations. And I honestly think some dioceses have a very good program where they do that, and other places it seems kind of a back burner kind of issue, back burner thing where it's not brought into the parishes and things like that. And an average parishioner might go to mass, for several years without hearing about the idea of vocation in their parish.
Mm-hmm. That certainly may be the case in a lot of places, and probably in my archdiocese as well. It's probably not the thing that's front of mind for me, seeing as I'm running the seminary day to day. If you were to ask me that question about what are the challenges and growing edges, I would say that one of the things that I'm on a day-to-day basis most conscious of in the way of attention is the time constraints, the time pressures. So it remains the case today that understandably bishops and those responsible for life in the church have a desire for the formation of men for the priesthood to move along as smoothly and, so to speak, as quickly as possible. And you can appreciate the reasons why. There are the priests in the parishes. It's an expensive job to form men for the priesthood. But one of the things that my colleagues and I here at the seminary are mindful of, and other rectors and seminary formators are mindful of, is given the lay of the land today, it is very challenging to do adequate formation within the time constraints that are still generally envisioned by the plan of priestly formation. I will say, though, that one of the very recent, potentially big developments, good developments in the realm of priestly formation is Pope Francis's new ratio, or relatively new ratio on priestly formation, which I think he promulgated back in 2016 or so, and which is trickling down to the local level. Just a year before last, the U.S. bishops approved the latest iteration of the plan of priestly formation based on Pope Francis's latest ratio. And one of the things that's central in Francis's ratio, which I think is very commendable and needed, is that Francis wants to accentuate that we should not be driven by the clock. The course of priestly formation should not be determined by these unnecessarily rigid formation categories and frameworks. In other words, pre-theology takes 2 years, and then theology takes 4 years, and then a man gets ordained. We should rather tailor the path of formation according to the man we have in front of us and what he needs in the way of mentoring and assistance and formation, and how it comes along in the course of however many years it may take. I think that's probably a prospectively very significant development in the world of priestly formation, which would be good.
Excellent. That gives me something I need to read now, because I'm moving from being just a professor to also being on the formation team. And I may have read it quickly a decade ago when it came out, but I don't remember much from Francis' ratio from 2016. So I definitely am going to read that over the next few months.
It's a very worthwhile document, yeah.
Moving on to Optatam Totius itself, there's a few major themes of the document. I'm just going to, kind of give a sentence or two to introduction. You can give a paragraph or two kind of explaining what it's getting at. One of the big things that it seems to focus on is how how areas of formation are interconnected, right? So we don't just take doctrine over here, spirituality over here, pastoral work over there. How is it talking about that interconnectivity of the different aspects you want a priest to be formed in?
Well, I think it's a theme that you find in Optatam Totius, and that comes out very strongly in John Paul II's post-synodal apostolic exhortation in 1992. There's a real attentiveness to the fact that the priests, the ministerial priesthood, is ordered to the service of the people of God. And seminary formation, therefore, has to bear in mind what the goal is. Now, it seems obvious, but obviously the Council Fathers had to state it because it may not have been as obvious as it should have been, which means that, first and foremost, as the Council Fathers will say, we need to take more seriously, the dimension of human formation, the psychological development of the young man, the proper importance of freedom and discernment along the way, and then also take very seriously the development and quality of this young man's practical judgment with respect to interpersonal relationships and pastoral situations, his ability to relate to people in a pastoral context, etc. So you have the human formation, which has to be taken more seriously, and that's going to come out very strongly in John Paul II's document in the early 90s. And then, of course, you have the spiritual formation, because, of course, the priest is supposed to be the shepherd of the people. And there's no way you can be a shepherd after the Lord's own heart if you yourself have not been formed in a deep relationship with the Lord. Hence, one of the reasons why the Council Fathers are going to stress formation in Scripture. There's going to be a very strong emphasis on the role of Scripture in formation, the formation process, and a very strong emphasis in that document on the development of a prayer life, a genuine deep spirituality, which includes pious disciplines and practices and devotions, yes, but not exclusively. there's clearly a statement in the decree about the importance of developing a deep spirituality based on a relationship with the Lord in prayer. Then, of course, you have the intellectual formation, which is going to be important because you're shepherding the people, you're teaching the people, and then the pastoral formation, as I mentioned at the outset. So the Council Fathers understand the interconnectedness of what will become explicitly stated in John Paul II's document as the 4 pillars of priestly formation: the human, the spiritual, the intellectual, and the pastoral.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think those things, like, like for us, we do certain prayers in common, like the spiritual discipline. And then, I'm a religious, so we have it's in the schedule 1 hour of mental prayer every day. As a diocesan priest, there's different things that might be in that realm, but obviously, personal time in prayer and things is important too. Not just, I pray the liturgy hours, I pray the rosary and things like that. One of the aspects here also is in being imbued with Christ and with the church in the formation. And how do you think that that's really expressed in Optatam Totius, that kind of imbuing with Christ and imbuing with the church?
Well, it's connected, I think, implicitly. What's it's being connected to is this notion that salvation is an individual endeavor, a private endeavor. It's a very un-Catholic way of thinking, but may have crept in some measure in Catholic thinking through influences like Jansenism, etc. Salvation is not an individual private affair. It's a theme. It's a theme that comes out strongly, for example, in Benedict's encyclical on hope, Spes Salvi. We are the people of God. We are social beings, and salvation is a common journey together as a people in Christ. And the priest's life, the priest consecration and ministry, is inherently necessarily connected with the people of God. A priestly vocation is not a private affair, not a private enterprise. It's inherently necessarily connected with the accompaniment of the people of God. So therefore, the priestly vocation is inherently an ecclesial reality, and a man has to discern that in the course of his priestly formation in order to come to a good determination, and for the church to come to a good determination that he's suited and ready to be a priest. It seems obvious, but it's not always so obvious.
Yeah. One of the things I often say when I'm talking to people and explaining our Catholic thing is it's we and Jesus, not just I and Jesus in that sense, right? And I explained that. I talked about that a lot when I did Lumen Gentium on the church, obviously, that document. I think I said that probably 4 or 5 times throughout the course of that, going through that document. The last 2 themes I listed here seem like themes we've kind of covered already, which one was like discipline for the sake of forming virtue, which we talked about. We talked about the history. And then the second one was that balance, like have that scholasticism like they did before Vatican II, but also that emphasis on the Bible and the fathers and things like that. I didn't think you had anything to add to that, but do you?
Well, the only thing that comes to mind, and you may have addressed this in previous episodes, but one of the figures that looms very large in this conversation and all conversations about Vatican II is, of course, Henri de Lubac, the French Jesuit, who, if God so wills, will be beatified in the not too distant future. Henri de Lubac has to be one of the great godparents, if you will, of godfathers of Vatican II. And so much of his work in the course of the 20s and 30s laid the foundation for the inspiration and dynamic of Vatican II. So Henri de Lubac, of course, would have had a strong emphasis on the social dimension of the Christian life, as opposed to the hyper-individualistic and privatized notions of Christian discipleship. Henri de Lubac would have emphasized very, very much the central role of Scripture in the life of church and discipleship. De Lubac would have also very much emphasized the importance and the need to study the fathers, meditate on the fathers. But that comes through in this decree as well. De Lubac, of course, is the one who starts the Great Apostolate Source Chrétienne in the 30s. And so the themes that trace their way through W. Black's work in the first half of the 20th century are going to very much find themselves in the documents of Vatican II.
Oh, definitely. And for the listeners who don't know about it, Source Chrétien is kind of like a critical edition of all the fathers of the church, like the top Christians the first few centuries in their writings, and to find all the manuscripts and works and get the best version we can out of those. Those of us who are in theology know what it is, but not necessarily, my mom or my sister would know what that is. So going on to the outline, the document has 7 chapters, and I just want a few sentence summary of each chapter so that as we go through it, the listeners would be aware of it. The first one I think is pretty self-explanatory. It just says that the program of priestly training is to be undertaken by each country, and so they make a program of priestly formation, there's one for the U.S., one for Canada, etc. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think this document, as does John Paul II's document, takes into account the importance of different local realities in the formation of men.
Okay. Yeah. And so the second chapter here is on the urgent fostering of priestly vocations. What might you say? How might you summarize that in Optatam Totius?
Well, one of the things that stands out to me in that document, and that's still very, very relevant today, of course, is it says very explicitly that the primary place where vocations are nurtured and fostered is the family. And that remains the case today. The family is the primary catechetical incubator of the faith, primary formators of the parents, and the nurturing of vocations takes place first and foremost in the family. And a lot of our work in the seminary and the formation of men for the priesthood specifically takes account of the family dimension, the blessings and the shortcomings of respective family backgrounds in our work of forming men.
Oh, definitely. I think that's so true. I'm going to repeat a story for the listeners, but I think Father Doherty might enjoy it as well, that I said earlier in the podcast. But there's a woman I know, and she has several sons, no daughters. And she was talking to her oldest son, who was probably about 8 at the time, and saying, explaining that like grandma was her mom, and when she was his age, grandma was like her age and things like that. And she's like, and then later on, like, you'll get married and have kids, and I'll be your mom. And the boy's like, but what if we all become priests? And and that's the kind of attitude she'd build up in her kids, that was just another option. I thought was a very beautiful example of that building up of vocations in the family.
So there's nurturing and supporting vocations. And of course, the vocations it's God's prerogative, and it's really important for parents to support and nurture, but not to coerce or force or impose.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So chapter 3 is on setting up major seminaries. Could you say just a few words on that? What we expect in that chapter?
Well, I mean, one of the things that stands out that's important to note, and sometimes the obvious things are the important things to note. The Council Fathers do, and John Paul II will also affirm the principle coming out of the Council of Trent, which is that major seminaries are important. They're very instrumental in the formation of men for the priesthood. And the Council Fathers are not looking to get rid of major seminaries. They're not tossing that out the window. And it seems like an obvious thing to say, but it's actually a really important thing to say, because they could have taken a different tack. My sense in reading that document and John Paul's later exhortation and other related material is that the judgment and the conviction about the importance and place of major seminaries is connected with the Lord Jesus' own path of recruiting his apostles, if you will, and forming them. So John Paul II will, in his exhortation, refer to the fact that the Lord Jesus in the Gospel of John invites the nascent disciples to come away with him for a while and to come and see, if you will. So I think there's an important sense in which the church continues to believe and maintain that formation for the priesthood does necessarily entail a space and a time set apart where the young man can come and see and be with the Lord in a more exclusive and somewhat secluded way before he is sent out in a more definitive way.
Excellent. So moving on to chapter 4, it talks about the careful development of the spiritual training. which is really that spiritual aspect of formation. I think we talked about already the development of prayer. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Just to reemphasize, I think one of the things that the Council Fathers are concerned about and have in mind is this point that I alluded to, namely, the men need active, involved mentoring and direction. You can't expect good formation to be done by having hundreds of guys together with a couple of priests and just relying on the daily ordo and the disciplinary regimen in order to successfully form men. They need to be accompanied one-on-one by spiritual directors and formators in order to mature and integrate the relationship with the Lord and get them ready.
Excellent. And chapter 5 is on the revision of ecclesiastical studies, which I think we somewhat also already covered, talking about how the Bible and the fathers were emphasized more, not just Thomas Aquinas. We do have a lot of Aquinas still. Is there anything else you would like to add to that?
No, I don't think so. Again, I think Doherty is a big part of that inspiration. Scripture should be at the center. The church fathers next. The perennial tradition of Thomas and scholastic thinking, of course, is central still. That's important to note too. The Council Fathers are not getting rid of scholastic thought, and Thomas in particular. That's not at all what they're saying. It's rather a move to fill out, if you will, the intellectual formation of the men.
Excellent. So moving on to chapter 6, it talks about the promotion of strictly pastoral training. Is there anything you want to add to what we've said already about that aspect?
Well, important to note here, again, formation for the priesthood is formation for ministerial priesthood, which necessarily implies a priesthood of accompaniment of the people of God. And therefore, you can't expect to have an adequate formation without testing and seeing whether the given man is going to be suited to that kind of work, and without giving him a sufficient preliminary formation in that pastoral accompaniment. Otherwise, you're just missing the boat. You're not forming the man for that thing. You might be forming him for monastic life or some other form of consecrated life, but you're not forming him adequately enough for the ministerial priesthood.
Oh, definitely. I know in our community, we always make sure that the brothers are out for at least 2 years before, like out in what we would call a house of apostle, which is much closer to what a rectory would be for the diocesan priests or secular priests before they make their final vows, before that final decision is made.
When I was a Jesuit for 10 years, as you said, and I did, and I tell the men here this, not infrequently, they roll their eyes, but it has its place. I did 4 regency years as a Jesuit, and those regency years are those years in the field full time. I did 4 of them, and they were very good. They helped me a lot.
Yeah, I did 4 as well. The standard was 3 when I was doing it, but then like the guy who was supposed to replace me, discerned out like a few months before the switchover, and they're like, "Well, can you just do a 4th year for like practical matters?" Because part of the thing with us is it's also like, at least for us, is you have a responsibility. We need somebody there to be, helping, like doing that role at the school. We can't just abandon that and things like that. So anyways, our last chapter there is training to be achieved after the course of studies. Is there anything you wanted to mention we haven't already covered?
Not exactly. It's a theme that is of ongoing interest and concern to this day. What do bishops and the seminaries responsible for formation, what can we do? What more can we do to help new priests transition into their priestly ministry and accompany them for, often we speak about the first 5 years of priesthood. What more can we do to help form and accompany those guys as they start their priestly life?
Excellent. So moving past Vatican II, the biggest document on priestly formation, since it is obviously Pastoris Dabi Vobis, but from John Paul II in 1992. Both of us did formation not too long after this document came out in our own priesthood and things like that. And I know for my formation, we referred to Pastoris Dabi Vobis more than Optatam Totius. Pastoris Dabi Vobis is like, if you just count the paragraphs, almost 4 times as long. It's 82 paragraphs versus 21 paragraphs. I didn't do a word count, but it's noticeably longer. And we've already covered some aspects like the 4 areas of formation: the intellectual, spiritual, human, and pastoral. Is there anything else that you want to add that you think is important to note about Pastoris Dabi Vobis?
Just to reiterate a point that I think I've already made that I think is very interesting and important. If you read Optatam Totius and then you read Pastoris Dabus Vobis, what you realize, right, back to back, I reviewed both of them this morning before this interview, for example. One of the things that stands out is what you find in John Paul II's document. It's already in the conciliar decree. It's there in germ form, if you will. The 4 pillars of formation, the primary concern and intentions for human formation, the concern for pastoral preparation, the exhortation to broadening out intellectual formation, the imperative for genuine personal spiritual formation. It's all there in the conciliar decree. And in a lot of ways, there's not much new in John Paul II's exhortation. It's very, very impressive how perceptive the council fathers were in a relatively short document already, only in 1965, before a lot of the insanity, of course. It's amazing how perceptive they were. It's very impressive.
Excellent. So one of the things we noted in that first chapter is each country should have their own formation. In the U.S., there's the program of priestly formation. Is there anything you think like an average Catholic in the pew on Sunday should know about that we haven't already covered?
Well, the PPF, as it's referred to, is not an especially long document. It's the latest iteration, again, is a very well written document. I think lay faithful in the pews who have a bit of time on a Saturday afternoon or something could benefit from reading it. It's not especially long, but it's very, very well crafted. The team that put it together did a very good job, and it could go a long way to helping the lay faithful understand what it is we're trying to do in seminary formation. It's a very, very good document.
Excellent. Yeah, I had here a note. Any other documents? You already mentioned Pope Francis in 2016, his Ratio, which emphasized not being straitjacketed about the time for guys going through and be a little more personalized. Is there anything more important of Pope Francis' document or any other documents you think are super important to understand priestly formation and today?
Well, I mean, I think those are definitely the primary ones. Those are the ones that stand out for sure.
Okay. Excellent. So, Father Doherty, here we have an opportunity for our guests to promote something. I know you have a liturgy conference coming in about a month after this podcast episode will air at the beginning of July. Do you want to say a little bit about that conference for our listeners?
Sure, gladly. Thank you for the opportunity. So one of the institutes we have here at St. Patrick's Seminary is a Catholic Institute of Sacred Music under the direction of Dr. Jennifer Donaldson-Nowitzka, one of the world's premier scholars of sacred music and practitioners of sacred music. Through the Institute of Sacred Music, we do all manner of things, including host conferences. And we will, as we did 3 years ago, we will hold another major liturgical conference here at St. Patrick's in July 1st through 4th, I think it is. We will have a number of important prelates present. I think Sean Cardinal O'Malley will be present. Robert Cardinal Seurat will be present. Cardinal Ranjith will make an appearance via Zoom. I think he's not able to make it in person. And then a good number of other prominent liturgical scholars will be here over the course of several days to deliver papers. And it promises to be a terrific event. And those who have a particular interest in liturgy or those who want to get an introductory, a more serious introductory entree into liturgy are most welcome to check it out.
Excellent. For our listeners, I'll put the link to that, which is liturgysummit.org, in the show notes if you want to find out more about that. Any closing notes, Father Doherty?
No, thank you very much for the podcast, Father. I think it's a great initiative, and I hope it has a good success.
Yeah, thank you for being on. And thank you, listeners, for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to help Starcross produce it and other great podcasts at sgpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the Starcross Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to start reading Optatam Totius, and we're going to cover paragraphs 0 to 1, which is the introduction in chapter 1. There is a paragraph 0 of that document. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook or X.
Amen.